You're listening to The Opportunity.
Hi, my name's Adam Grant and I'm the Director of Communications at the Superpower Institute. Today we're bringing you a recording from the recent World Economic Forum First Movers Coalition Green Iron Summit in Adelaide, co-hosted by Greenhouse and supported by Boundless Earth. The Green Iron Summit brought together government, industry and finance leaders from across the Asia-Pacific to discuss how Adelaide, and South Australia more broadly, can position itself as a first-mover hub for green iron production and exports. The opportunity for Australia is immense, a fact increasingly recognised in the national conversation. But the question remains, how do we start? First up, you'll hear from Professor Ross Garnaut, co-founder of the Superpower Institute. Ross sets out why Australia has a unique edge in green iron and why South Australia in particular is so well placed to lead.
Thank you. It's very good to be here. I'll begin by reminding us why we're doing these things, talking about green iron and decarbonisation. The world, human civilization, faces a dreadful challenge, and time is running out. Global increase in global temperatures as a result of increases in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere are already doing great damage. Nowhere in the developed world are they doing more damage than in Australia. And here in South Australia, we're very familiar with the range of challenges. That's now with an average global temperature increase from pre-industrial activities of about levels of about or just below 1.5% on 1.5 degrees on average. That increase in temperature will keep getting higher and higher until we've got net zero. If we get to net zero in 2050, it will stabilise temperatures higher than they are now. The damage that we're already experiencing now will be greater, but it won't keep on getting greater after we get to net zero. If we're late, if it's 2060 for the world as a whole, as a world that includes India and Nigeria, if we're late in getting 2050, the temperature at which it will stabilise will be higher still. If it's 2070, it will be higher still. If we never quite get there, if there's 10% of emissions we don't get rid of, it will get higher and higher and higher, and the damage will get greater and greater. It is real existing damage now. It will keep on getting worse until we get to net zero. It would be better if we could get to net zero at 2035 than 2050. It will be more and more damaging with every slippage that we get. That's why we're doing it. At the Superpower Institute, an independent philanthropic organisation that some of my colleagues here today worked together to establish a couple of years ago, Rod Sims, an eminent Australian, as chair. At the Superpower Institute, we're looking at one particular dimension of the Australian and global transition, and that is what Australia can do through expanding its own zero emissions industries to supply countries which are not so well endowed with us with zero carbon opportunities. Already we've put out a number of major contributions, excellent pieces of work. Most importantly too, in November last year, the Superpower Institute published a paper. It was released in Parliament House, Canberra, by Mr. Ayres, now the Minister for Industry, who's then Assistant Minister for Future Made in Australia. That looked very carefully at what the world economy will look like when it has zero emissions, net zero emissions. It will be different in many ways today. Today, the largest trade in the world is the old energy trade, trade in oil and gas and coal. In some years, when the price of oil is particularly high, it's more than, some years it has been half of the value of total world trade. That trade has allowed countries with almost no endowments of oil or coal or gas to be great industrial countries. Countries in our own region, Japan and Korea, extreme examples of that. In the zero emissions world, we're also going to need very high levels of international trade, but it will look very different. It will not be the same countries which were endowed with large quantities of oil and gas and coal resources that are the big exporters. It will be the countries that are endowed particularly with zero emissions energy resources, renewable energy. Australia is the standout in the world. There will be special advantages if countries with rich renewable energy also have endowments of the raw materials that need energy for processing. Australia stands out as by far the world's biggest exporter of minerals that require a lot of energy in processing. We have other advantages as well. What that new energy trade paper says is that if economics drives the reshaping of the world economy, we will see a huge expansion of processed product exports from Australia, goods exports, which will remove about 10% of global emissions. And it will not be export of electricity or hydrogen. There'll be some of that. It will be mainly export of goods embodying zero emissions energy or biocarbon, usually a combination of the two. Transport fuels, a combination of the two. Australian exports will make it possible for countries that have a great industrial strength, high incomes, but very poor renewable energy resources of their own, to remain countries with high standards of living for their people and high industrial capacity, just as it makes it possible for Japan and Korea today with no coal or oil resources to be great industrial states. That's what's at stake. This can be transformational for the Australian economy. We will lose gradually two of our three biggest export industries as the world moves to net zero. We won't be exporting much gas at all. Once the world gets to net zero, we won't be exporting much coal at all when the world gets to net zero. But we'll have other opportunities. The Superpower Institute's paper says several times as large as the industries that we lose. That's transformational for Australia. It makes it possible for countries, most importantly in Northeast Asia, first of all China, Korea, the economy of Taiwan, but to some extent also China and Europe, countries with, relative to their industrial size, small capacity for renewable energy production of their own, to maintain high living standards in the zero world economy. That will, Australia's exports can replace about 10% of global emissions. That's more important than Europe going from where it is now to zero emissions in Europe. It's almost as important as the United States going to zero emissions. That's at stake. Now, the second big paper on our topic is a green iron plan for Australia, which came out in a few months ago, last April, launched by Andrew Leigh, the Minister for Productivity and Competition. And it digs down into the iron sector in particular. Iron is one of the two big Australian export sectors, if economics drives the zero carbon economy, the other one being zero carbon transport fuels. The reasons why Australia needs to take this green iron opportunity seriously, first of all, it's economically tremendously important. Turning our iron ore into iron metal would remove about 4% of global emissions, about 4 times as many emissions as total Australian emissions at the moment, getting on towards the total emissions from the European community just from green iron. It's also a natural hedge against the loss of our coal and gas exports. There are still some people, not very many people who can read these days, who don't accept the science of climate change, who recognise we're in deep trouble already and getting more seriously in trouble with every year in which we've got positive net emissions. But there's lots of people who think, well, we're not going to get there. We'll just have to live with a destabilised world, a destabilised political order. If you think that, then if you invest now in industries that could produce zero carbon exports from Australia, you won't do very well, but you might be wrong. Humanity may succeed in dealing with this destabilising problem of climate change. If you think that's a possibility, you should be wanting to hedge against it. This is a natural investing in the grain industries is a natural hedge against the I would say likely, some would say possible loss of our coal and gas industries. It's green, using hydrogen in industry, not as an export product in itself that's going to be important in Australia. We got this a bit wrong when the Commonwealth government and the Morrison government made a big fuss about a hydrogen strategy. Alan Finkel was chief scientist. They were right that hydrogen was going to be important, but there are all sorts of reasons why it's going to be much less important as a direct export in liquefied form or even embodied in products like ammonia. This was set out in my first Superpower books. I explained there in some detail why hydrogen itself would not be a big export. It's the smallest molecule that seeps out between the molecules of standard steel. It's expensive to build materials that will capture it. You lose some on the journey, and it's a dangerous greenhouse gas in itself as you lose it without combustion. It won't liquefy until you get almost to natural zero. You lose almost half of the energy, and just in getting it into a liquid form so you can transport it. Very different from methane, from so-called natural gas. Hard to export in that form. Very easy to export if embodied in iron. If it's used to convert iron into iron ore into iron metal. Very easy to export if it's used with biocarbon to make zero carbon transport fuels. This report looked very closely at the costs of green iron in different parts of Australia. It looks at what we thought were the 5 leading candidates. And we're talking about the early stages of the development, the early projects. Very lowest cost happens to be in South Australia, the Upper Spencer Gulf. The advantages include the juxtaposition of magnetite resources with exceptional renewable energy resources, but also the established infrastructure and the fact that South Australia is a nearly 100% renewable energy grid, soon to be 100%. You've got high variability of prices. Hydrogen production is highly variable. You can greatly reduce the costs of iron making by only using the electricity in the electrolyser when renewable energy is abundant and cheap. That reduces the overall cost. The detail of this is in the report, so I'll just go quickly through it. Now, we won't get to net zero without quite strong government policies. It's one thing to all agree we have to get there, but we won't get there without strong policies. There are 3 policies that the Superpower Institute emphasises in this report. Standard economics, taught in every university course in the world, I think, says that markets don't work in the public interest if there is external costs from private activity that are not either blocked by regulation or balanced by a tax on that activity. The extreme radicals of right-wing fundamentalism who said markets should do everything and governments nothing, like Friedman and von Hayek, said you do have to correct for market failure by taxing external costs. There was a time in the early development of industry, not a lot of industry along the Torrens, but in Melbourne along the Yarra or Perth along the Swan River, when industry just dumped all of its rubbish in the river. That was the cheapest way of getting rid of rubbish, the cheapest way of making vinegar or starch, that's for sure, by dumping the waste in the river. Cheapest way of making iron if you produce a lot of carbon dioxide waste, which damages every other human on Earth, the cheapest way of getting rid of it is to throw it into the atmosphere and let it damage the climate. No doubt that's in the private interest of any producer of iron, but good economics says in the elementary textbooks when any firm or individual is damaging others by their economic decisions, they should either be stopped from doing that by regulation or they should pay a tax equal to the damage they do. We need to price emissions. Professor Stern at the London School of Economics called the untaxed emissions the greatest market failure in human history. The second requirement for government is in providing common use infrastructure and public goods infrastructure, electricity transmission, hydrogen storage and transport particularly important. The third is the positive external effects of innovation. Just as if you're emitting greenhouse gases, you're damaging everyone else and you should be taxed for it, if you're pioneering a new technology, you're generating knowledge that everyone benefits from, and so the efficient operation of markets requires government to support that fiscally. So the innovation, the early use of new ways of doing things should be subsidised. That's just good economics. That's not a subsidy. Not doing it is to subsidise everything else. In this chart, again, it'll be too brief to probably absorb it, but it's in the Superpower Institute's report on green iron on the website. With a production tax credit, you start to get very close to international current prices for brown iron made from gas or coal, and in particular in the Eyre Peninsula, you're getting globally competitive, but only if those recognition of the external costs of greenhouse gas emissions are taken into account. This is a bit more complex. You will have to study the report to absorb this, but we're taking into account as well here a reasonable assessment of the benefits that the first movers in the new technologies provide to others, and we suggest a general capital grant of about 30% of the capital cost would handle that external benefit from innovation. The Minister referred to the $1 billion Iron Innovation Fund for the first movers, $500 million each for the first two. That's about 30% of $1.5 billion, which is about the capital cost of a 1 million tonne plant. So that aspect of the government's policy has got it about right. But there will need to be many different kinds of innovation, and we'll need to have fiscal support for many different variations on that innovation scheme. So the Minister's $1 billion will have to be extended. Again, focusing on this region in South Australia, the Eyre Peninsula's advantages come from, compared with well, the big iron ore region in Australia is the Pilbara. The second biggest iron ore region in Australia is the Eyre Peninsula and Upper Spencer Gulf, and the midwest of Western Australia, the Geraldton region, the third. The cost of building things are not as high as in the Pilbara and in remote areas of Australia. It's adjacent to high-grade suitable magnetite resources. Very good capacity factors for wind and solar. The combination of wind and solar, especially if the wind is diurnal, flowing more strongly at night, is a big advantage. And interacting with the grid is a big advantage. The fact that you've got established industrial regions there is a good start. South Australia is green iron ready now with economically rational policies, production credits equivalent to what a carbon price would do if we had a carbon price, and support for innovation make the Upper Spencer Gulf economic now. If those policies are properly in place, then we can have production by 2030. Initially, one of the advantages is you've got existing transmission infrastructure, so you can move quickly. That would support about 1 million tonnes of production in each of the industrial centres of the region, Port Pirie, Port Augusta, Whyalla. If you get much bigger than that, you need more investment, and it will take longer, but you could have 3 million tonne plants by 2030. This could be part of the Whyalla solution. Whyalla, a beautiful plant, a brilliant idea of a great Australian, Essington Lewis, in 1941 to build a blast furnace and associated steel mill there. Maybe that same steel mill, as it was in 1941, is not the best use of those resources in 2025. The work that we've done shows that a green iron solution supporting an electric arc furnace and downstream processing would be more competitive. But Essington Lewis was a great man with great ideas, and there's still some support for continuation of his ideas from that time. But quite separately from the future of Whyalla, the big future of the Upper Spencer Gulf is green iron. There will be multiple plants in each of the Upper Spencer Gulf cities. Each of them will employ a lot more people, together with the renewable energy supply chains that support them, than the steel industry supports in Whyalla today. That will happen if economics drives the future.
Next, the conversation turned to a panel moderated by my colleague Joanna Kay, TSI's Program Director for International Strategy. Joanna was joined by Sam Crafter from the South Australian Government, leading the transformation of the Whyalla Steelworks, Chief Executive of Infrastructure South Australia, Jeremy Conway, Max van Summeren, Managing Director at Bivios, and John Tsalaptis, General Manager of Zen Energy. Together, they explore the practical steps to getting a green iron industry off the ground in South Australia.
Max, I'm going to start with you, if I could. We saw, and Ross talked about the brilliant work that the Superpower Institute did with the Green Iron Report. You also did some of the modelling on that, and were part of that key group that pulled that together. So firstly, kudos to you and the team. Really want to hear about the background to that and how you came to the data and the analysis and what led us to get here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joe. So that was a process which was supposed to take 3 months, and I think ended up taking 9 months. And we could have carried on for another 9 months. The original intent was to try and develop some benchmarks for the cost of production in a small number of locations. We initially looked at the Pilbara and the Eyre Peninsula. Now, there's already a lot of good work which has been done on the cost of iron production in Australia, and plenty of fine reports out there. So we had to scratch our heads and wonder what we were really going to add here when we built the evidence base for TSI's report. What we realised, though, was there was relatively little work which had considered the entire value chain, right from the production of the renewable energy, including the addition of potentially a connection to an electricity market, all the way through hydrogen as an intermediate, and then the production of iron itself. And what the production costs would look like in different locations if you were to optimise across that entire value chain. So there had been some academic work done in that area, but we felt that there was a real contribution that we could make there. And we also saw the opportunity to look at different technology pathways as well. Now, there are quite a few emerging technology pathways, some of higher risk and lower technology readiness level than others, and some more mature. We wanted to capture some of that, and that led to the two technologies which Ross presented at each location which we studied, an inflexible type and a flexible type of technology as well. And then the final point I'll make on the approach that we took, it was all about coming up with an optimized solution in each location to understand what we felt, in a general sense, the lowest levelized cost, taking into account what we know at the moment in each location would be.
Still on. I think, and we talk a lot about the comparative advantage that Australia sits in. And Ross, you're really good at talking about this and recognising that Australia has the opportunity not to just, decarbonise our own economy, but certainly the economies of others. How important is this rigorous kind of economic underpinning to the conversation that we need to take this forward?
It's what it's all about. It's the fundamental economics. The fundamental economics gives Australia a comparative advantage in producing anything that uses intensively renewable energy. In a zero-carbon world, I gave a speech on this, public lecture at Oxford University, setting out a lot of the details, and I must say that the feedback from that through the UK and Europe was a bit like a blinkers falling from the eyes. So when people started to see, yes, that we are deeply constrained in Europe and the UK by poor renewable energy resources, it will be very expensive to us to decarbonise. But as soon as you say, well, you're constrained with oil and gas, and that hasn't stopped your industrialisation, and they start to think of international trade as being part of what an efficient economy does, then the blinkers fell from their eyes. Australia's comparative advantage in these new industries, in hard economic terms, is what it's all about.
Brilliant. And John, really keen to hear from you as well. I know that you've done quite a bit of work on green iron. You've recently produced a report as well. What is it from an industry's perspective that makes this so unique for us here in South Australia, but also for Australia more broadly?
Yeah, so we've been working pretty hard with Zen Energy since 2022 in earnest on looking if we can put in a green iron plant at scale, not a demonstration or a pilot. So that means we had to evaluate the technologies that Max was talking about. That's the value to technologies that exist now, but also the roadblocks that we're going to be discussing today. Yeah. But the big difference is, and also we're working with lots of people from Hilt institutions right through to OEMs all over the world. The big difference with Zen is we're starting with what is required to allow that green iron to be produced. And it has to start from the energy. So you're starting on from the energy to produce hydrogen, and as Ross said in his presentation, not hydrogen to do everything for everyone, it's hydrogen to abate the CO2. That means hydrogen for reduction processes. So we're starting from that point, which means the process for the Green Iron Initiative involves energy production, renewable energy production, hydrogen production, and a process that can convert that material with 100% hydrogen into an iron product. And that iron product then becomes the export commodity or the commodity you use to make green steel in Australia or green steel worldwide. The interesting thing for that process, and we've got lots of colleagues from many, many years in this room and also all over the world, the interesting point about the green iron product is everyone says to you, if you make it, we will buy it. But not many people are interested in actually participating in the making of it. But there are lots of people in the world that were quite bullish, and the roadmaps, perhaps we can talk about the flow sheets people have been talking about, particularly in the last 5 years. There's been quite a bit of groupthink. We start with natural gas, we replace a little bit of natural gas with hydrogen, and off we go. That's quite timid. It's sensible, but it's not because of technological issues. You can reduce with 100% hydrogen. It's just you can't afford to yet. So you have to put the elements in place to be able to do this. And quickly, back to the Green Iron Initiative in Australia. So we've been looking at all over Australia, not because we want to eat each other as states. We think we can do this in Australia in a collaborative way, and there's lots of opportunities from demonstration plants in different technologies, but we think we have to start. And what we're trying and what we're motivated by is to do it at a commercial scale to prove that you can. Now, I was just saying about the groupthink. There's lots of people that have been talking about this now, particularly since the last 6 years. But hydrogen's been a little bit like the internet in the 90s, where you just do everything on the internet, you do everything with hydrogen. That's not quite right. And you've had a bit of a retraction going on. But there are believers that you can do this, and there are people that are. So there is a facility that's now in northern Sweden, which are actually commissioned. And they're not a steel maker, but they're actually emerged as a leading green steel maker, a company called Stegra, H2 Green Steel, you may have known them by. But they're also doing the same thing in northern Sweden, in the Arctic Circle. They're looking at putting in a green iron process at a scale of about 2.1 million tonnes of green iron, using 100% hydrogen, from technologies that are relatively mature, but it is leading edge, and we can talk about them a little bit later. So that's just an intro. But we're looking at how can we do this in Australia, and South Australia particularly, and what we're talking about, we've assembled all the elements to see could we do this at scale, and the scale we think we can do it now. We have to do the work in terms of the feasibility and the getting to FID feed, but we're assembling all the elements. That's from electricity production, renewable electricity production, storage, hydrogen production, and a green iron process, but using 100% hydrogen if we could.
And I like the words you said, if we make it, they'll buy it. Wouldn't that be great? So, Sam, I've got a question for you and Whyalla. And South Australia, we talk about it as a great defence state as well. I know this is outside your jurisdiction, but is there an opportunity to create domestic off-takers for green steel and in the defence sector in South Australia, so we can kind of catapult that demand mechanism domestically as well as internationally as a two-track approach?
I think there definitely is. In fact, there was some defence procurement people that we toured through the Steelworks last week. So there's a lot of elements to the Defence Force steel requirements, but this one was about a particular calibre of steel that needs to be made for some armaments that need to be done. And the good thing is that Whyalla absolutely can produce the grade of steel that's needed, and then the question is how do you go about doing that and the rolling process and things like that. But yes, absolutely, I think there's an opportunity for domestic use for expanding the market, if you like. So there's obviously a significant market around infrastructure. I think there's opportunities to grow that around rail and other things that One Steel are working on, constantly. And I think having steady and stable operations happening again at the Steelworks helps to build that confidence back in the market, which then means that you can start to look at what else could you do. And obviously there's a range of concepts about how you would best upgrade the Steelworks. And some of those go to the rolling mills and how you might want to look to produce some other products, which opens up more markets again, which is where the defence sector probably comes in. So. And because you've got a microphone, what's the timeline? Like, what do we talk about? I know there's steps that need to be taken, and you're probably limited by what you can say, but what is the timeline for Whyalla? So the process that we're working through, I think consistently we've talked about, probably being an 18-month process from last February to get through to finding and having the right new owners in place. And I think that then that looks at, it'll depend a lot on what people are planning to do in that transformation, but I think realistically a lot of that work is going to have to happen within the next 5 years to be able to transform the facility and do that. I mean, there's an ability for it to move faster, and then I guess if people want to stage things in different ways, it might take a bit longer, but I think that's the sort of time frame. Okay, well, 18 months from last February, so that puts us COP31 Adelaide hosting fantastic announcements, so that's brilliant. Music to the ears, no doubt, of many people in this room. Jeremy, one thing we all agree on is that we need to accelerate this opportunity and we need to get a move on, we need to get things happening.
Infrastructure is a really big piece of this conversation. Grid readiness, ports, hydrogen is a key part of that as well. How do we get there? What does it look like? What are some of the challenges and opportunities that you're working through at the moment?
Thanks, Jo. I think when we look at green iron, one of the things that we think through in some of our strategic planning is recognising that green iron is potentially a higher value product and definitely one that lends itself to more value add than just your bulk DSO. And so that presents different sorts of infrastructure challenges, tends to be more energy intensive, more water intensive. And so when we go about that planning, we need to make sure that we do the necessary trade-offs to understand what is the right solution and does it make sense to do it at the pit or at the port. And so there's a different range of trade-off sort of equations you need to go through when you do your infrastructure planning. I think there's also a reality, and there's been some comments earlier today around the benefit of common user infrastructure. I think some of the deposits we talk about in magnetite are not of the scale that you see in the Pilbara, and so that's where I think good strategic common user infrastructure enables you to aggregate the demand so you get sufficient scale to underwrite those necessary investments in the infrastructure. So they're the sorts of things that we have to think about when we go through our infrastructure planning, but it's definitely going to be more energy intensive, and John and people at Zen and that are going to be important in terms of trying to get the electrons, but also water is a key constraint that we're having to think through, and some of that is how can we economically get water to the right place, and some of it is where can we innovate in the technology so we use less water in the processes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I recall a conversation with industry last year, which was a magnetite miner in South Australia who had several mines, but also had like the full pit to port kind of supply chain, and it was really interesting to see that and see it unfold in South Australia and how it can actually happen in a really pragmatic way. So that's brilliant. But my question is, who pays for it? So you've got private industry is coming in and they want to set up a project and they require access to water, they require those electrons, then government also wants to see this. How does that piece work?
I think the reality is it's a bit of a shandy.
Is that a technical term, Jeremy?
Yeah, a financial shandy at least. I think Ross spoke quite eloquently around some of the innovation spillovers and what's the role of government to step in that first mover sort of role. The reality is if you're trying to facilitate common user infrastructure, there is often a timing mismatch in terms of when off-takers make final investment decisions and commit. So government has a natural role to look at how it can mitigate those risks for the private sector, but ultimately this is the sort of space where we need private capital to come in, whether that's the miners themselves, whether it's the steel off-takers, whether it's infrastructure funds who can make an economic return on some sort of tolling arrangement. It's something that will require a little bit of a shandy and some pretty solid business cases all around to make these things work.
Fantastic. It's the first time I've heard shandy mentioned 3 times in a panel, so
I might be
kudos
thirsty.
to you, Jeremy. I don't think you meant... No, we didn't have that. No one said shandy at the CEDA panel last week. But Max, this is a question for you. In the modelling and the pulling together of the Green Iron report, obviously one of the recommendations that TSI put out was around infrastructure. What was your kind of take on that, and what's your, in an ideal world, what does it look like? And can you talk a little bit more to that?
Yeah. If I talk first of all about the assumptions that we made about infrastructure in the development of the numbers for the report, we wanted to look at 5 different locations, and you could spend a year looking at each location in detail and the infrastructure requirements around a specific location. So that's what we didn't do. We didn't delve into that level of detail. Instead, we flipped it around a little bit. We ran the model and then identified what infrastructure you would ideally have to achieve those levelized cost outcomes. So the additional costs of infrastructure were essentially left outside the boundary of our model. So, for example, if we identified a larger grid connection would be appropriate for a certain location, that then went into the results. What we didn't then do is put on the additional transmission cost. Moving away from the modelling, I just want to relay one experience I had around infrastructure from the summit that was held in Gladstone a couple of weeks ago. So the summit was a half day, and after we'd had lunch, a hydrogen proponent who's in the room today suggested we go and have a look at his site. So we drove out in the ute, and I knew that there would be nothing there. It was going to be basically an empty field. But when we got there, it was an empty field with trees on it. But you could also see where the transmission corridor ran past, and he talked about how that line was going to be upgraded, where the substation was going to go. Or we had obviously just turned off a road. His potential off-taker was just over the fence, and there was an easement corridor to take, if they were to do an export of ammonia, to take that to the port as well. So that really brought home to me what we're actually talking about when we're talking about infrastructure. It's about having all those different bits in place that you can then drop a project into the middle of it. And I think there's still a lot of work to be done to understand what the optimal mix of infrastructure is, just to do just enough to get the private proponents to come in.
I think South Australia is talking about that as the renewable, what do you call it, state development zones? Is that what you're calling them?
Yeah, I think we're looking to, as part of the Coordinator General process that's been through recently, set up some state development areas, which is, and in fact it's something that Queensland has done. In fact, Gladstone has a pretty significant state development area around it, but it means that it's an ability to coordinate that in a strategic way. So it's particularly around those larger scale industrial development areas.
Perfect. And you know, hydrogen, I'm sure there was nothing in the field that you saw, Max, but it's the most abundant molecule in the atmosphere. So it's all around us. That I think hydrogen is something we need to talk on. Ross, you gave a speech, I think, in March or early April in South Australia, where you were saying hydrogen is not dead. Do you want to talk a little bit more to that? And then, Sam, maybe some comments on the South Australian Hydrogen Jobs Plan, but also where South Australia is still working on hydrogen as well.
Yes, I mentioned in my remarks today that Australia got off on a bit of a wrong track with its enthusiasm for hydrogen. My book, Superpower, Australia's Low Carbon Opportunity, had a few pages talking about how export of hydrogen itself and use of hydrogen for energy is not the opportunity. It's using it for industry. And but for energy, it's not impossible that, I think that if you've got large-scale hydrogen production and storage for industry, then running a peaker plant off that, so you're not putting in all of the storage infrastructure for the peaker, could very well be competitive with gas at the extremely high price of gas in South Australia and Eastern Australia, world's highest prices, several times as high as prices in the countries which we export LNG to. Hydrogen that uses infrastructure and storage established for industry might have a role in peaking, but generally hydrogen will not be an efficient path to energy storage for electricity. Neither will it be a big export industry in itself. There are some economies that are so desperately poor in zero carbon energy sources that they will simply have to use high cost energy of some form. So the extreme cases in the world probably are big industrial economies that have almost no renewable energy capacity are Singapore and Taiwan. Well, they will have to import power, Singapore, through under submarine cables, or in extremely expensive forms like nuclear. But both Singapore and Taiwan have banned nuclear, or imported in expensive forms like hydrogen. That they will have no choice. But for other economies, including big industrial economies that have relatively poor renewable resources like Japan and Korea, they will not import hydrogen. They will import goods embodying zero carbon hydrogen made elsewhere. So what's not dead is hydrogen as an input into industry. What should be dead is the idea that was the main idea about hydrogen in Australia a few years ago, following the Finkel work, is that hydrogen is going to be a big export industry like methane is today.
So what the South Australian government took a position 4 years ago that someone had to go first at building at scale hydrogen, and so that is what the endeavour was with the Hydrogen Jobs Plan. That's what we pushed very hard to do, and we were well advanced in doing up until February this year, when the circumstances changed at the Steelworks and government had to make a difficult decision about where it prioritised that allocation of capital, and that landed on the continuation of the Steelworks. But so I think that's what the ambition was. What we've seen, unfortunately, is that no one's got there yet, and in the short term we won't either. But I think where this ties back in is the pull for hydrogen is also, as Ross has just talked about, not eventuated in the way that everyone thought that it might in terms of the global demand. So what we really do think is the pathway that will see hydrogen come through is through the production of green iron, so, and the broader industrial decarbonisation. And so in Whyalla, maybe I've got rose-coloured glasses on, but it may well be that in Whyalla in South Australia we still have one of the first grid-scale hydrogen production facilities that's up and running to feed the hydrogen into the decarbonised iron-making process that we're going to deliver through the transformation of the Steelworks. So we very much see the work we've done as giving us a key platform to build on as we look at that industrial transformation. So we think that leadership work will pay off. It'll just come through in a different form than the original project. Yeah.
Fantastic. I'm just going to quickly, are there any questions from the audience? Brilliant. Very happy to keep going. I recognise, I think we've got about 10 minutes left, and I will make sure we're on time. With the global market's an interesting one, and the Superpower Institute has done a lot of modelling, and our reports all, talk about fixing the market failures. Ross, you talked about that as well this afternoon. It's a great opportunity, but how does that really fit into the global conversation, and how do we stay competitive in a global market, recognising our comparative advantages, but also thinking about the Middle East and what they could effectively do to deal with that prices. So I know we all know why Australia can do this, and I think it's really well convicted in the Superpower Institute's work. It's everyone around this room knows we have this opportunity, but what is it that makes us more appealing than others to be able to do it?
Yeah, I'll kick off. So if I compare South Australia, and particularly the Upper Spencer Gulf, with the Middle East, they similarly are fairly water constrained as well. But there's a couple of truisms around infrastructure to make it economic. One is you utilise existing infrastructure as much as possible, and it's one of the great benefits for why Whyalla in particular could be a first mover. We have a lot of existing power, water infrastructure there. There's existing closed-loop rail. There's existing slurry pipes in the Middleback mine. So there's a lot of existing infrastructure that is already in place that enables you to have a launch pad to launch from in an economic sort of way without having to spend a lot on new infrastructure. Proximity is also a very key thing. Building infrastructure long distances cost a lot of money, and we are quite fortunate that we have these world-class coincident wind and solar resources in proximity to the magnetite resources, which are in proximity to a port. So I think it's those confluence of factors that really position the Upper Spencer Gulf well to be able to be one of the first movers in this sector.
And possibly Australia as well, right? We have those existing trade routes already with key trading partners in the region, and stability and uncontested waters that we're trading through as well, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And as it's the port, name escapes me, but there was a huge modernisation of one of the ports recently in South Australia as well, right? And isn't that part of the conversation around green iron?
Well, there's a couple of different proposals. So there's one on the Eyre Peninsula that's looking to be built for iron ore export. And then Port Bonython is a collaboration between the South Australian Federal Government focused on the potential for hydrogen export, but we think now becomes an opportunity for a broader industrial access for that port as well and use. Yeah.
I think for
hydrogen
South Australia...
embodied.
Sorry, just to close off on the port point for South Australia, We've often looked at envy with the Pilbara, where you have big Cape ships coming in, and we don't have the same deep water conveniently accessible in South Australia for a lot of the state anyway, Cape Hardy aside. I think the reality is if you're exporting a higher value good, you don't necessarily need the capes in the volumes that you might be moving. I think there's also a reality is we talk a lot about wanting to put the thing on a cape. A lot of ports in the world can't receive them, and so you have to transship it at the other end anyway. And so optimising the fleet for where the end port is something that actually South Australia has a lot of opportunity to play with as well.
Max, any comments?
Yeah, I'll keep it brief, and really just to build on what Jeremy was saying. It's not necessarily just about the competitive advantage which we have in renewable energy. It's also what we do with it, and the modelling has really shown that. So the issue with renewable energy, of course, is you've got variability within it. Now, to get to the lowest levelised cost of iron in our modelling in each different location, you've got a number of different tools to deal with that variability. We've talked about the flexibility of the iron-making process and the flexible versus the inflexible, but you've also got storage of electricity, storage of hydrogen, you've got connection to a broader electricity market as well. You need to bring all these ingredients together in the right way to get the lowest cost of iron. And building on what Jeremy was saying, we've got so many of those ingredients baked into our existing infrastructure already and into our low emissions grid, particularly in South Australia, which makes it such a fantastic testbed.
And I'm conscious if we've got a minute left. So Ross, I'm going to go to you for the last question. We saw Albanese in China last month, a couple of weeks ago. Really big green steel conversation, CEO roundtable. Is there trade and economic opportunities that are happening now? How are we getting there? What is the kind of next piece of this action agenda for Australia on making us the superpower we need to be to deliver this?
I think that was a really important set of conversations our Prime Minister had with the Chinese President, Chinese Premier, leaders of the Chinese steel industry. I was a little bit envious because the receptivity of the Chinese side was much more ready and easy than when I was ambassador for China and we had a visit from Bob Hawke. I was talking...
What year was that, though?
The big visit was 86, and we were talking... Well, 84, then 86, and we were talking to the Chinese government about large-scale imports of iron ore, really large-scale imports, and they said, no, we couldn't do that. How could we... It's fundamentally important, iron ore, for security. How could we be dependent on a capitalist country aligned with the United States? And in any case, there's 2 million people employed in iron ore production. How can they lose their jobs? No. There'll be a little bit of iron ore export, but not much. And I was made honorary professor of the Wuhan Iron and Steel University. They've got a specialist university on iron and steel. And I gave my inaugural lecture at the beginning of '88 and said, we'll know whether Chinese development, with its high ambitions to quadruple GDP in 2 decades, has succeeded, because if you're importing tens of millions of tons of iron ore per annum, you'll succeed. The Premier of China put out a press statement 3 weeks later, not mentioning me, but said, some foreigners say we'll be importing tens of millions of tons of iron ore by the end of the century, but they don't understand the Chinese situation. Well, now China's importing 1 billion tons of iron ore, most of it from Australia. The Chinese economy has internationalised so much that it's actually a natural conversation now to go the next step, importing iron metal rather than iron ore. That's a much smaller step than importing iron ore. They could be self-sufficient in iron ore, but it's very low-grade iron ore and you waste your capital. You need to spend twice as much on your steel mills to make the same amount of steel if you use very low-grade iron ore. They decided economically not to do it. They could be self-sufficient in zero-carbon iron. Coastal and middle China, with most of Chinese people, doesn't have any opportunity for solar or wind, go further inland, and there are some, not the same very good combinations of solar and wind as in Australia, not as good as in Australia, but they could do it at some cost. But the economics says that a proportion of that will come from Australia, a proportion of their renewable energy requirements, probably a very high proportion, maybe 100%, of the industrial goods that use a lot of energy. So China's moved so far towards a market economy, an internationally oriented economy, that this is a natural discussion. The discussions about China's large-scale import of iron ore 4 decades ago was a very difficult and unnatural one. Mr. Albanese's got it easy.
The quote of the day. I also think that's a brilliant place to end. We've seen this before, we've done this before, we've activated as a country to be able to create new markets and new opportunities. And I think when we look at the post-carbon world or a net zero economy globally, this is Australia's opportunity to really capture that and to be at the forefront of that as well. And we've done it, and we can certainly do it again.
Thank you.